Hello and welcome. On the Politics Show this week, they call him Saint Vince. But can Vince Cable's reputation as the most trusted politician in Britain survive this election campaign? We'll find out with the help of some sceptical voters. Regions and from Mr Cable himself. And a very warm welcome to the Politics Show. Thank you very much for being with us. And I think that probably part of your reputation, part of your party's reputation, is that you use moderate language and that you are kind of restrained in some of the things you say. And yet Nick Clegg stands up at a news conference and says a vote for the other two parties is a vote for corrupt politics. Is corrupt the right word to use?
Well, I think he was referring to something very specific, which is the way that we fund political parties, and it is corrupt. And all parties have been damaged by the system whereby rich individuals...
Therefore, it's all parties,
yes.
not just...
Let me just deal with the issue of party funding. All parties have been damaged by that system. We have tried to change it, and we pressed very heavily for reform of party funding in such a way that there are limits to individual donations, limits to what are spending, and the attempts to change the system were blocked by the other two parties. The Tories, because they have these exceedingly rich individuals like Lord Ashcroft, and the Labour Party because they're dependent on...
You took a couple of million quid from a party donor who's been convicted of all sorts of things. You haven't handed that money back?
That's why I made the comment I made.
But then the corruption is of all three parties, not just...
The system was corrupt, and we have tried to change it because it's wrong. And we've been blocked from changing it because of the vested interest in the other two parties. And I think that was what the point that Nick was trying to make.
OK, but wouldn't it have been perhaps better to have described it as there is a corrupt system of finance, but actually to say that Labour and the Conservatives are corrupt, but you are cleaner than clean and whiter than white, is incorrect?
He wasn't saying that the other two parties are corrupt. We're saying that the system is corrupt.
That's exactly what he said.
It needs reform.
It would be a vote for voting Labour or Conservative would be a vote for corrupt politics.
For the very simple reason that they're resistant to reforming it. And we are arguing for fundamental reform of the system in respect of party funding, in respect, for example, of the corruption we've seen in the House of Commons, the whole expenses crisis. We wanted to take tough action. Right. MPs should be recalled, forced to have by-elections if they abuse parliamentary rules. Those are the reforms that we've been pushing and which have been resisted.
Let me just move on to something else, which is the poster you unveiled this week, and I think we can show it to you, a reworking of the Labour tax bombshell. This is the Tory VAT bombshell. You would pay £389 more a year in VAT under the Conservatives. Where does that figure come from?
Well, it comes from taking some of the spending commitments that the Tories have made in respect of taxation. In other words, their inheritance tax pledge, and particularly their commitment to cut national insurance, which they've made a big deal over the last year. We know from experience that when they're...
Sorry to interrupt, but the poster says you would pay, not that you might pay. Well, the Tories have said that they will not raise.
Well, it's a reasonable prediction based on their past form that when they're forced to...
But you passed it off as fact.
We passed it off as a reasonable prediction of the way they would behave.
The poster doesn't say this is a reasonable prediction. Yes. This says you would pay. I mean, I just kind of come back to you want
I'm trying to put this in fairly simple language. The Tories have an enormous problem to do explaining how they would cover this big budget deficit, which they've been talking about incessantly for months. They've got no explanation of how they'd do it. They're now making... Let me just finish the argument. They're now making extra spending commitments. We're saying on the basis of their past history, when they've been in government, the way they deal with this is to increase value-added tax. That's all we're saying.
Would you rule out raising VAT?
No, I don't. It's
so
something...
therefore your position is no different to them?
It is fundamentally different because we've taken the view that if you're tackling the problems of the big budget deficit, you've got to spell out, you've got to look first of all at public spending. And we've tried to do that. And we've identified quite a substantial list of commitments that we would make in public spending. The commitments that we would make. The Conservatives haven't been willing to do that. The problem is if you're not willing to do that...
And the figure you reach is £389, not £390, not £388, not £388.50.
That's an attempt... It's obviously an approximation, that's simple common sense. But that's the
but then it's not truthful.
Of course it is. We're talking about a sum which equates to the gap that they are unable to explain.
Sure, but then you are fighting a campaign saying we are not the corrupt politics, and you're using exactly the same tactics. I mean, let's leave aside whether or whether not there is a black hole in the Tories' finances. Leave that to one side. You don't know factually that they are going to raise VAT. That is your conjecture.
It is a conjecture, and it's a reasonable assumption, and I wouldn't claim any more than that.
And that £389 is a rough
it's a
figure
ballpark. It's a ballpark estimate of what it would require in order to fill that gap, and it seems a reasonable way of expressing that argument.
Sure, but then it is not clearly absolutely truthful that is what they would do. It doesn't say anywhere on the poster, this is your conjecture. I'm just making the point that I know that this happens in election campaigns, but the Liberal Democrats are meant to be a bit cleaner, a bit kind of more honest about these things.
If we published a poster with footnotes and notes to editors and what this figure actually means, it would be regarded as rather ridiculous, wouldn't it? We're trying to get across a basic, simple message that the Conservatives have made very large commitments in respect of tax cutting and in respect of spending, which they're not willing to explain how they would do it. That, in our view, is fundamentally dishonest politics. We try to suggest what in practice that would mean, and it almost certainly would mean a big increase in value-added tax. We're just trying to illustrate it.
It's a good piece of propaganda.
I would prefer to be talking positively about the things we would do in tax policy.
Well, it's your poster. This is your first poster.
And it makes a perfectly reasonable point.
If you would rather be talking about the positive message, that you could have said, no, I'm sorry, let's have a poster that deals with what we are going to do.
We're having our manifesto launched this week, and you'll be able to read all the positive things that we're going to do, and I'm very happy to talk about.
Okay, let's move on. Let's bring in